Hello and welcome back to today's video. Today we're going to be talking about the top 10 best tanks for you to take for the new upcoming Tier 10 7v7 clan event, Maneuvers. Let's get right into it. So, the first tank I recommend you take is the Object 260. Obviously, it is a reward heavy tank, so you are going to have to complete the campaign missions to have it, but if you do have it, I would say this is the number one pick for heavy tanks. This tank is going to be especially good in a brawling scenario. Especially if your team takes 2, 3, 4 of these tanks, you can push in as a team. You have the DPM, you have good armor, and you have good speed for rotations, which is very important in maneuvers. This tank will be very, very, very good, especially in those brawling scenarios. So, take advantage of it. Now, for the second tank, I recommend you take the CS63. This tank, just like the 260, has the speed for rotations. This thing is the quickest medium tank in the game, so take advantage of it. Yes, it does have pretty weak gun handling, and obviously it can only really be usable when it's outside of its speed mode, but this tank, especially for 7v7 events, is just so powerful to take an early game position, especially if there's one or two of you. You can use it as a pseudo light tank. You can use it to run a ridge. You can use it to take a position to deny the opponents taking a position. It's incredible for taking crossfire because it has the speed to rotate. And its gun, especially if you kind of take V-stabs potentially, it's pretty okay. So, this is probably, in my opinion, the best medium tank to take for maneuvers. Let's talk about the IS-7. This tank is going to probably be the third pick that I'd recommend you take for maneuvers. So, if your 260 is damaged and you can't repair it, or if you don't have a 260, in my opinion, the IS-7 is the next best thing. Especially as it does still have that speed, it has the armor, better armor than the 260, which does kind of make it a little bit slower, but this tank is still incredible in a brawling scenario. It does also have the trick that it is incredibly good at ramming tanks, so if you're in a brawling scenario and you're brawling against medium tanks, 907s for example, this tank's just incredible for the ram. You can ram, shoot, you got the armor, so they'll struggle to pen you. In general, this thing is just going to be a beast for maneuvers. So, let's talk about the next one. So, the Super Conqueror. This is going to be the fourth tank that I'd recommend you take for maneuvers. It's just the Super Conqueror. I think the fact that it's getting nerfed recently tells you all you need to know about it. This thing is just purely the DPM machine. It is going to be incredible for those kind of positions where you want to put a tank and you potentially just want to put one tank there and rotate around the rest of the map and take map control with the rest of your team, because this thing will trade very effectively for its HP because it does have that incredible DPM. It isn't the slowest tank. It has good armor. The DPM obviously makes it capable of trading very effectively. This tank is just going to be very, very, very good for maneuvers, especially if you don't have the 260, especially if you don't have the Super Conqueror. You could be the one slow tank. I recommend kind of taking probably one or two of these on a team. You put one in one position, one very close to it to take a crossfire position, and if the enemy team want to push in to take those two tanks out, they bleed and they trade pretty poorly for it unless they push a lot of their team into it. So, the Super Conqueror. Let's talk about the next one. So, as I mentioned earlier, the Object 907. This is going to be the fifth tank that I recommend you take for maneuvers. This tank, obviously, it is a campaign reward tank, so you are going to have to have played a campaign previously, but this thing is just pretty good for maneuvers. It's very, very useful if you take a couple of these. So, for example, maybe your 260, your IS-7s, your CSs are damaged and you can't repair them. Yeah, take the 907. This thing's quick. It has DPM, it has decent armor, and if you've got a few of these tanks are very, very good when they've got a group of them, because they can push in and just kind of swarm, and you'll find if you're playing against worse opponents, they just kind of panic, which, obviously is better for the 907 because it can just bully the opponents. This tank is also very, very good, potentially to take as just maybe one or two of them if you are pushing in, because it can finish off those low HP one-shots, which means your IS-7 or your BZ-75, for example, won't have to waste its higher alpha damage shot on finishing off the low HP target. The 907 is very useful for that. So, let's move on to the sixth one. So, it's time for the 60 TP. This thing is just a beast. As many of you know, if you play advances or you play any kind of like clan rivals or anything, the 60 TP has become the meta really since the Chieftain and 279E nerfs, and this tank is still going to be pretty useful in maneuvers. Yeah, it's pretty slow, but it has armor, high alpha, decent-ish DPM. This tank's just going to be very good in a kind of similar scenario to the Super Conqueror. You're going to want to put it in a position, hull down, where it's going to hold an angle that will potentially spot rotations, that will potentially stop the enemy team being able to take it into the cap without taking punish. That's kind of where you're going to want to use the 60 TP, and it is pretty good for that. But you're not really going to want to use this thing in a brawling kind of scenario because it does kind of lack the DPM, but it can kind of act a little bit as a meat shield to take some shots for your opponent, so it won't be the worst tank out there. So, talk about the 7th one. So, let's talk about the BZ75. This tank is pretty new to the game, so a few of you may not have this one, but if you play Advancers or once again Clan Rivals, you'll see a lot of these things on especially maps like Cliff, Mines, any map where you want to take into a position to be able to punish the game early. But this tank is definitely not going to be the best for maneuvers, but it is going to be useful if you don't have 260, IS7, 60 TP. This tank is going to be able to work better in a brawl than those tanks. But as we'll talk about next, there is another tank that is potentially better for that kind of situation. This tank is just going to be pretty useful. It's not going to be the best, but it's going to be the next best thing, if that makes sense. Just like how the Super Conqueror was to the 2790 and the Chieftain prior to their nerfs. It's going to be okay, but definitely not the best one out there. So, let's talk about the 8th one. So, for my 8th recommendation, it's going to be the Object 277. This thing is going to be the next best thing to a 260 and an IS7. It's pretty good. It still has that speed of rotation. It's still going to have that brawling capability, that ramming capability. But it is definitely worse than a 260 because its hull in general is pretty flat. It's going to be punched through by pretty much most things frontally, whereas it doesn't have that pike nose that the IS7 and 260 has. But this thing is still going to be pretty useful in those kind of brawling scenarios. It has decent plan. It has a decent-ish gun. It's a little bit trolly, but if you're in a brawling scenario, you're going to be up close to your opponents anyway, so it doesn't really matter too much. And that is something to note in maneuvers. You're not going to really care about the gun handling of your tanks too much, because a lot of the times you're going to be in a brawl. You're going to be literally fighting focus fire in a very, very close-spaced scenario where your gun handling doesn't matter as much. It's more matters you pen your shots and you focus the fire. So 277 is going to be pretty good for that. So let's move on to the last two now. So here it is. I know you were all probably waiting for it. It's the Object 279E. This tank, yes, it's nerfed, but it's still going to be pretty useful for maneuvers. Come on, it is still the armored brute that it was before. It's just slower, has less hit points, and a slightly worse gun. But it is still going to be useful for maneuvers in the kind of same position that you'd put a 60 TP. In my opinion, the 60 TP is better than the 279E for those kind of scenarios, especially in maneuvers now. But the 279E, it is still going to be useful. It is just going to be useful to put into a position where you angle up, you spot rotations, you punish them if they try and take a position, and you are going to be a pretty painful tank to kill if they do have to push into you. But it is definitely not going to be as good in those kind of brawling scenarios because it has lost that HP and its speed. But if you were to push this thing with a CS or a 260, you could potentially still use it in those kind of brawling scenarios. Put it high on a ridgeline if you're on Sand River. Put it angled up on a hull down if you're on, I don't know, Himmelsdorf. And it will still be pretty useful. But I do feel the 60 TP is a better choice. So, time to talk about the final one. So, the final tank that I recommend you take for maneuvers is going to be the KPZ-07PE. This tank was available through the assembly shop, so it is a pretty exclusive tank, and I know quite a few of you won't have it, but if you do, this tank is going to be pretty useful. It has the speed, it has decent frontal armor, it has a decent gun. This tank is going to be pretty okay to brawl, but it does have that weak side, which is penable by Hesh, so you are going to have to be careful of that. But this tank is going to be pretty useful. It can play hull down on a ridge, so it can hold positions, but it can also then push in after holding that position. It's got the speed to be able to rotate, decent gun to be able to punish. Yeah, this tank's going to be pretty okay, but there are going to be definitely better choices. You know, 260, Super Conk, 60 TP, 277, in my opinion, are all going to be better to take for maneuvers in this tank, but this tank is still going to have a use. You're just going to have to be aware of where you use it, if that makes sense. So, let's move on to the conclusion of this video. So, Thank you for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed and I hope you got something from this top 10 list. But don't forget, this list is not just exclusive. These are not just the tanks that I'd recommend you playing. There are a number of other tanks that you could definitely take. 430U, 140, 1-1, 1-1B, Monkey King. All of those kind of tanks do spring to mind. But this list is going to be the top 10 tanks that I recommend you take. Anything else will be slightly weaker than anything that's on this list, but definitely could still be used, and definitely in the right situation could be proving vital. But hope you enjoyed. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and comment below if there's any tanks that you think I've missed off the list. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye!